Hello, my name is Julie, and today we are talking about the books I read in November. If the sun goes away, I'm literally just ending the video. I don't care. I read some books in November, so let's talk about it. Get a beverage. I have some hot chocolate here in my Christmassy Kahlua mug. Exciting. Before I forget, if you have not already, you should join my readathon freezeathon. It's running through all of December. You can join late. It does not matter. You can read any book to join us. It is a team-based readathon where you join a genre-based team, submit all of the books that you're reading that month, and the team with the most points per person at the end of the month wins. It's very fun. Good community we got out on Discord. I think I keep asking myself, why do I feel so weird every time I do a wrap-up while I'm pulling up my stats? I think it's because I feel like I'm reading books that I don't think I am going to rate well, and I read them anyway. Sometimes that's how a book surprises you, and I do it. But I think because I have been trying to get through a backlog of books that I have that I'm kind of no longer interested in, a lot of my wrap-ups feel strange. Let's start out with my stats. Let me move over so you can see them. I read 10 books in November with a total of 3,394 pages. Let me check my monthly stats. It's possible that's the lowest amount of pages I've read in a month. It is. Even with the 400 pages-ish that I read of Les Mis this month, that is still the least amount of pages I've read in a month this year. Yeah, that's only 3,700. The least I've read this year is 3,900. But I had an average rating of 3.54 and no 5 stars. That is the second lowest star rating I've had this year, with the worst being 3.38, which is the only time I gave out a 1 star fully this year. The average page count that I had was 339.4. I had 333 in July. So that's not even the lowest I've had this year. And I had an average pages of 113 per day. I read 5 books from my owned TBR, whether that is physically or on audiobook, and I only added 1 book to my TBR, which I immediately read, so it's out of here. So I am at an annual net of negative 31. Usually about half of the books I get in a year are in December between sales and Christmas, so I think I'm in a pretty safe territory to be at a negative TBR for the end of the year. As for star ratings, as you can see, it did not go well for me this month. I guess there's one book that I could kind of consider thinking about being a 5-star, but it doesn't feel like it. I had 1 book that I'm not giving a rating, 7 books that I'm giving in the 3-star range, and 2 that I'm giving in the 4-star range. I read 6 fantasy this month, 2 nonfiction, 1 mystery thriller horror, and 1 science fiction. I don't count the nonfiction that I read in a lot of other stats that I do, so it's not in my series standing section. So I have 5 sequels that I read, 2 standalones that were fiction, and 1 book that was the first in a series that I am honestly considering to be a standalone. I read 6 books physically and 4 on audiobook. I read 4 authors that were new to me, 5 authors that I had read from before, and 1 author that I have read from this year previously. As you can tell, I read a lot of short books that I wasn't even that invested in this month. So let's just get into me reviewing the books. The first one I have for you is Why Fish Don't Exist, A Story of Lost Love and the Hidden Order of Life by Lulu Miller. I picked this up from a free little library for my dad a couple of years back, and he ended up giving it back to me. He didn't adore this one. I was under the impression that this book was about taxonomy and how the categories that we make as humans aren't actually real because of the title, Why Fish Don't Exist. That is a real thing in taxonomy, that we do not have a solid definition of what a fish is and is not. Any line you could possibly draw leaves out things that are obviously fish or includes things that are obviously not fish. And my friend who's an ichthyologist would back me up. But it turns out that this book is actually more about David Starr Jordan, who is probably most well known for being the first president of Stanford. And she had heard the story of David Starr Jordan a long time ago there was an earthquake at his Stanford lab, and all of these fish specimen, the jars had fallen to the ground and broken, and he had gone through and hand sewed new tags to all of these fish, and was a symbol of perseverance to her. And so this book is essentially a biography of him and her relationship with the knowledge of him. Because the more she finds out about him, the more she finds out that David Starr Jordan was delusional, a terrible person on multiple accounts, including either colluding to murder someone or full murdering someone himself. And a total eugenicist, as a lot of people who were into taxonomy at the time were, because they were trying to find all these lines between good animals and they applied that to humans, essentially. I read so few things things that are along the lines of biography that I would not have picked up a biography of a person who is a bad person had I known that. I went into this expecting something more along the lines of talking about why fish don't exist. You know, the title of the book. There were a couple of chapters that I thought were interesting that Lulu Miller ends up talking about the delusions of grandeur that this man has for himself, that he just believes himself to be so successful that like whenever he has a failure, he actually turns it into a good thing about himself. He was power hungry and doing a lot of terrible things to disabled people. It's a very short book that you can definitely get through, but like I didn't really get that much out of it. I gave this a 3. It wasn't what I was looking for at all, and I don't think it was that great at what it was trying to do, and I will be giving it back. Though I do want to make clear, Lulu Miller does not support David Starr Jordan anymore. Like, this narrative shows how awful of a man he was, and I think it does justice in that department. So, also he married like a minor or something. No, she wasn't a minor. He was like the president of the university or like the college, and she was a sophomore student, which is crazy. Then I read 3 books for my Goodreads nominees video. If you haven't checked that out already, you can see it here. But the first book I read was Catabasis by R.F. Kuang, one of my most anticipated books of the year. And I ended up falling in with the crowd a lot with this one. So this is a fantasy that is about 2 grad students in the 80s who are in this world that is ours, but magic is part of academia, with this very vague magic system that kind of has to do with pentagrams, and it's very like formulaic sort of thing. It feels like creating an algorithm. Their professor has just died in a magical accident, and they want to still graduate with and get their thesis approved. They decide that they are going to go to hell to save him. And when they get there, hell is structured after the school they came from, Cambridge. I think this book is good thematically. It's showing off a flawed main character who's been absolutely shaped by this system that she has dedicated her life to, and that's academia. She has been warped by that. She has been taught to be selfish. She has been taught to be power hungry and that sort of thing. And I think that that is interesting by itself, but I don't know that I actually get to know Alice that well as a main character. This does have a little bit more romance in it than any other of R.F. Kuang's books. This did feel like the very myths that R.F. Kuang is emulating. It is this journey throughout the different layers of hell, right? And in that way, there doesn't feel like there's a lot of interlocking parts. It feels like everything just sits on top of each other in terms of the plotting. It doesn't feel as cohesive as other stories that I've seen her write, because it's all like this metaphor. So like, okay, we're going to go in one room, and this room is a metaphor for this thing. Okay, we're going to go into another room, and this room is going to be a different metaphor for the same thing. And it's like all the different deadly sins and how like academia brings them out. I think that is a very good comparison, and I think she does well with that. I just think the plotting of this book is not that great. And I also don't think the characters, Alice and Peter, kind of feel more like stock characters than I wanted this book to feel. It was all right. I think I'm landing on a 3.75 for this book. Then I read What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher. This is the first of 5 sequels that I read this month, and this is a horror novella that is the 3rd in the Sworn Soldier series. I think it's going to be 4. All of them are novellas about the same main character going on these different adventures, finding something folky and scary. This specific story was inspired by an H.G. Wells short story. It's called like Under the Mountain or something like that. And it takes place in West Virginia in Appalachia. Somebody who was a friend of Easton has reached out and been like, hey, my brother went missing in these mountains. Can you please find him? And a group of them ends up trying to explore these really tight cave systems. I think that the setting was cool. I haven't really read a horror book in a cave before, and that was fun. It's hard for me to talk about this book without spoilers because it is so short, but there are 2 sort of creatures that we meet in this, and there was one that I absolutely adored. I thought was a very fun thing to have in there. And there was one that just felt like a very typical big bad that didn't really scare me. The first book I genuinely thought was very creepy. The second book I didn't find creepy, but it did have these moments that were really metaphorically resonant. And then this one, I didn't think it really did either. I think in terms of like a new character that we meet in this book, people are really gonna like that one because I did as well, but it was all right. I probably won't be thinking about this anymore after reviewing this. So that's a 3.5 from me. So that book wasn't scary, but you know what is? Gynecology. For the buzzword readathon this month, I read It's Not Hysteria by Dr. Karen Tang, and this is a book that is about everything you need to know about your gynecological health that you haven't been told before. This is a informational nonfiction that is about different problems that can come up with gynecological health. The first section is like introducing you to all the different parts of the body, and then it's going into major problems that can happen and describing them, like types of symptoms, what type of doctor you should be going to, and that sort of thing. So it's much more of a book you read if you have concerns or if you want to be prepared in the future book, less a essay type book. I think I was expecting with the title It's Not Hysteria to have a little bit more to do with the idea of hysteria, which was forced upon women and not wanting to study their health and everything. That is addressed in the book. It is in the beginning of it, and I liked the little bit of insight that the author had there. This was a good thing for me to read, and it really tested my ability to be able to hear about biological things. I get creeped out by anatomy a lot, like literally just descriptions of anatomy freak me out so that I have actual tangible pain in my body. I don't know if that's hypochondria or what it is, but there were so many times where I'm listening to this audiobook and I had to flip on the radio for a couple minutes to calm down and then flip back to this. And I don't think the descriptions are gory. They're clinical, they're practical, and I just really can't bear it. But the further the book went on, I don't know if the subject matter was easier to handle because I was listening to it or because what they were talking about was easier. As it went on, I did a better job. Something that I really appreciated about it is that the author went out of her way to have inclusive language in it, inclusive of people with different gender identities, and talking about that explicitly on the page, but then also using more specific language to women or something like that when that is appropriate, specifically when talking about the past. I just think the author put a lot of care into this book and is clearly like looking out for the reader. I would recommend this book if you have concerns about your health. It is like a guidebook. It's not necessarily a book that you read like cover to cover. It might be something that would be nice to have around if you have questions. I thought it was well put together. I think it did its job. I thought it was organized well for the most part. So I think this is good, and I would recommend it if somebody was looking for something like this, but it is a purely informational nonfiction book. So I don't really know how to rate that. Then the book that literally everybody is here for, because I think like 50% of my audience has found me from it now. I did end up reading The Strength of the Few, again in that video. If you want to see more of my thoughts, you can check that out. This is the second book in the hierarchy. The Will of the Many was my favorite book of last year, and this is my most anticipated book of the year. Either this or Everything is Tuberculosis. I was looking forward to both. This is a Roman-inspired fantasy series. The book kicks off with our main character Vis, who is a prince of a nation that has been conquered by this empire, and he, on multiple levels, is spying on this empire in order to try to take it down. And there is one of the largest reveals I've ever read in a book at the end of book one that absolutely shifts the entirety of the series and what the series is going to be about going into book two. I have convinced so many people in my life to read The Will of the Many before The Strength of the Few came out, and then The Strength of the Few came out, and everybody's kind of reading it, and I do think that this book is getting more of a mixed reaction than the first book is, which is interesting because every single one of the early reviews that I saw was glowing. Here's my thoughts, because I can't talk a lot about this book. The Will of the Many is so deeply well received. If you look on Goodreads, it has a 4.60. The only book with that sort of significant amount of readership on Goodreads that is a first book in an adult fantasy series that has a higher average rating than that is The Way of Kings, which is widely considered to be the best thing that's happened in fantasy in the last 15 years. The Will of the Many is right up there next to it, and it has been loved by all different types of readers, and that's because Will of the Many is a deeply well-rounded book. If you are a character person, if you are a plot person, if you are a mystery-driven person, if you're a lore person, almost like a little bit less so if you're a world-building person, like a lot of the world-building is kind of done away from the main character. This book decides to put all of its eggs in a couple of baskets instead of spreading it out. We are splitting time in this book between different locations, and that means that we have different plot lines going on where book one was ultra focused and there could be so much stuff going on. It felt very lived in. It felt like you knew the characters. I'm not a side character person, and there was so much to get out of the side characters that I was very invested in learning about them, whether I like them or not. And this is one of my favorite protagonists I've ever read because we got to know him so well over the course of 600 pages rather than the vast majority of high fantasy being split between multiple perspectives. Then in this book, we do not have that dynamic anymore. While I do think it is a very fast-paced, flip-the-pages type book, it feels like pieces of it are missing. We keep skipping through time in all of our different perspectives that it feels a little bit more disjointed than book one does. There are even a couple of time skips that are basically just little training montages that happen in book one, and those feel so natural, and I do not think they feel natural in here. The feeling that I described, it feels like when you have someone that you see every day who then moves away, and then you only see their life in pictures. That's kind of what The Strength of the Few felt like to me. Do I think that this is an impressive feat of fantasy that literally nobody else is doing? Yes. Do I think the world building in this is great? Yes. Do I think this is being seen in a different way in this book that makes him out to be more flawed? Yes. Do I think this is as successful as a book as book one? No. I think that this should have been 400 pages longer. I don't know how much of this was up to James Islington, how much of it was up to the publisher, but book one is so tightly edited. I feel like so much of this book was left on the cutting room floor. And then anytime there was anything that did not seem to be deeply necessary, it stuck out like a sore thumb. And I was like, well, why are we having this? There's so much stuff that I would have liked to have seen, especially of our side characters that we saw in book one. It was so sad to me how little we got to see of them. I think the worlds in here are cool. I feel like this book was so cinematic. I think his vocabulary is amazing. There are things that are great about this book, but this book is for a more specific reader. This is for the reader who likes the world building, doesn't care about, like, I want to say the emotional part of the book as much, who's more interested in, I want to know about the world. And there are some people who are going to be diehard for this book and are going to say that this is a better book than book one. I don't think that is going to be the general opinion. That's what I'm going to say. There's very little I can say about the specifics of this book. There were several moments that had my jaw on the floor that I was really surprised that the author went there, and I think they were really brave. However, I do think you could argue that the stakes are being lowered. If you know, you know. I listened to the audiobook of the first book, which is unfortunately only available on Audible, and I think that sucks, especially because like not even libraries can get it. I think I had a much funner time listening to the audiobook than I did reading the physical book. I don't know how much of that has to do with book one versus book two, because I've never read the other in the other version. That's just a take I wanted to have. Then the last book that I read in that video was The Everlasting by Alice E. Harrow. And this is actually an expansion upon a short story that she wrote a couple of years ago. So this is about our main character, Owen, and he lives in a world that is not her own, but in a World War-ish era. He is a scholar. He specifically has focus on this figure from 1,000 years ago called Una the Everlasting, who she was a knight who ended up fighting for the queen who founded their nation. It's a very kind of Camelot type feel. That story, sort of Owen's guiding light, he ends up fighting for his country because he believes he sees a sign from her, ends up getting injured and coming back and trying to publish more stuff, and it's really not working until the Chancellor of War, I believe is her title, comes to him and says, hey, I want you to rewrite the Una story, and through her own means ends up sending him back in time to Una's time. And he is following her around being like, I'm gonna be your scribe, I'm from the future, I'm trying to get your story straight, and she's kind of not having it. This book is nominated for the Fantasy Awards, but I would argue that this is a fantasy romance. The focus of the plot is on letting the two people who are in love be together, and there are multiple explicit sex scenes on the page. I think the reason that this was nominated in fantasy was because of the author rather than the actual category, but I do think there are elements of this book that lean more into the speculative fiction sphere. Like, it is a little bit more genre bending, it's a little bit more interested in the speculative side of things, a little bit more gory than I would expect from a regular fantasy romance, but still, categories are fake, especially when it's a combo genre. I adored this book. I think if you were a fan of Laini Taylor, I think you should try out this book. I think if you're a person who liked This Is How You Lose the Time War, this is something that you could be interested in. I think if you really like Hadestown, you should definitely try out this one. While this book felt really unique to me, there were so many different little tiny pieces here and there that I felt like I could tie to other things, and I just had a really fun time. I really liked our characters. I loved how political this book got, because the whole idea here is they are writing stories so that they can control the narrative for the government. Like, that is the idea. And I really loved that conversation and how our main characters react to that and how they change over the course of the book. I loved how much we get to know Owen, and eventually how we get to know Una, as each of them gets their own part of the story. And I'd like to say, I did listen to this on audiobook, and I thought the audiobook narration was fantastic. It is dual narrated, and a lot of this book is written in second person as the main characters are addressing somebody. And I think that that really added a level to the audiobook experience. I loved how muddy the waters got as we went along. It just felt like a very layered story. Every single time like a new part comes, there's something new to look at. There were so many little details that it was fun to pick up on that at first you think, wait, hold up, that doesn't match up with what we knew earlier. And then it's like, oh wait, no, that's a clue. It was a very fun narrative to get through, and it was a relationship that I could really root for. I read 50% of the books that were nominated for fantasy, and this is one of my favorites of them, and it was in the bottom half. I would highly recommend it. Then I listened to a novella, When the Tiger Came Down the Mountains by Nevo Mountains? I wrote mountain, When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, singular. This is in the Singing Hills cycle, which is a fantasy novella series where our main character is Cleric Chi, who goes around different parts of the land, getting stories from all over for their collection and their cleric order. And each of the books is a different story, and you can read them out of order because of this. I have previously read The Empress of Salt and Fortune, book 1, and Mammoths at the Gates, which is book 4, I believe. This is the second book in the series, but it's the third that I've read. This is one of, if not the highest rated book in the series. I see why, but I still do think I had the best experience with Empress of Salt and Fortune. This specific story is Cleric Chi and a friend come across these tigers that can also morph into women. The friend that she is with has a story that the tigers also have the same story, but they tell it differently. It is going in between the two versions of the story and trying to find the truth of that story, and kind of showing how there's two sides or more than two sides to every story, especially folk tales, because that's what this book feels like. It feels like one long folk tale. And I did like that. It feels like a parable. I think the tigers themselves were very interesting characters, and it was cool to see them sort of interact with the humans and how they have differences and how they see things. And so as far as like a folk story goes, I did enjoy this book. It is just pretty short, especially because I can read these books out of order. I don't feel the need to DNF these books, but I haven't felt really strongly about any of them. I think I give a 4.25 to Empress of Salt and Fortune. So I think it's a nice little palate cleanser to have. I think I'm giving this probably another 3.75. It was good. I liked it better than Mammoths of the Gates. I thought it had a little bit more of a point to it, in my opinion, but it wasn't something that I will be lingering on. Then I read A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sangu Mandana. This is the second book in the Irregular Witches cozy fantasy romance companion series, and this is a 2025 release. We have no news as to if there is going to be more books in this world. And honestly, I don't think there are actually enough things that tie these two books together to really call it a companion series. Like, they are set in the same world. I don't think there is a single overlapping character. So our main character is Sarah. She was a very, very powerful witch growing up. When she was a teenager, she was like the second most powerful witch in Britain. She was being trained and everything. She was ready to have a bright future and everything, but she had some fight to it because she does not come from a magical family. Neither of her parents are from England. Her father's brown, so she's brown, and nobody likes that. People are racist and xenophobic here and don't want a person like her, who is not part of the establishment, to be a powerful witch. And then her great aunt ended up very suddenly dying when she was a teenager. Sarah ended up using her magic to revive her, and that ended up stopping her magic. She had a very, very small reserve of magic, and she has for several years wanted to restore her magic. And now she's in her 30s, has lived without her power for almost half her life. A spell book falls into her hands that can help her restore her magic, and there is a man who she knew back when she was studying magic who has come to her inn to stay with his younger sister, who is autistic and needs special care, and they are working together to try to bring back Sarah's magic. That was too long of a synopsis. I think that this book sells the found family aspect of all the different people who live in the inn very well. However, the main complaint I have for this book is I did not buy the romance at all. I personally did not feel any tension between them. I didn't feel like I did with the first book. With the first book, I was like, don't strike a match in that room because it's gonna catch fire. Like, this one, I was more invested in them like being in this found family together than I cared about them being together romantically, if that makes sense. I think that, you know, this idea of wanting to get her magic back and her feeling like she's lost something, I think this story of depression that we get with her, of how she has in the past struggled with her mental health and everything, was good. It just wasn't a story that I resonated quite as much as I did with the first book. I think that this does a lot of similar things. It just wasn't something that I was as interested in. So, and I think the ending of this book is a cliche that I've seen in this sort of plot line like too many times, so that I just like want one book that ends a different way than this does. But anyway, I thought this was all right. I think if you like the first book, you could like this one, but I don't think this is getting as good reviews as book one did anyway. Then I listened to Exit Strategy by Martha Wells. This is the fourth book in the Murderbot novella sci-fi series. So yes, all three novella series that I'm in the middle of, I read a sequel for this month. This was just turned into a TV show, and this is about Murderbot, who is a sec unit, who is a security robot in a far future. And their whole job is, you know, protecting people, shooting things, but all they want to do is sit and watch their TV dramas. The backstory of this series is that Murderbot killed a ton of people, and Murderbot has no memory of how that happened and has been trying to find out the corporation that stole that information from them. But in book one, there is this team that Murderbot is working with, trying to include it as like part of their crew. We've spent a couple books away from those people as Murderbot was given its freedom and decided to do things on its own, but now has crossed paths with the characters from book one and is wanting to protect them from a new threat. How many times can I say that I don't love short books? I don't know why I keep reading all these short books, but I was really expecting that by this point in the series, I would be really invested in Murderbot, and I'm not. I don't find the character to continue to be interesting. Like, I think the only book in this series that I really enjoyed was book two. I really loved the character of Art. Banter between those two characters made that book so fun. And I have felt a different way about books 1, 3, and 4. Kind of feels like a Monster of the Week episode type of book, where there's going to be one combat that Murderbot is going to have to take a couple of people through. It feels a little bit repetitive. It doesn't feel like I really have a lot of stakes in this, and I just don't feel strongly. I guess I feel something for Murderbot, but I don't feel anything for whatever situations Murderbot is in. If somebody wanted to watch the TV show with me, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I have no interest in continuing on the series, and I don't feel like I really get anything out of reading these. I am officially DNFing this series, and it's one more that I no longer have on my TBR. Then the last book that I read is from my latest video, and that was reading Wicked. So this is a bind-up of Wicked and Son of a Witch, books 1 and 2 in the Wicked years. years. I just read Wicked, and that is all I am going to be reading. If you want to see my full thoughts on that, you can watch that whole vlog where I go into the differences between this and the stage adaptation / the movie adaptation. This is a retelling of The Wizard of Oz following the Wicked Witch of the West's life from before she is born until she dies. And we see how she has, from birth, because she is green, she doesn't follow the rules, blah, 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 she is penalized and she is treated poorly. She is finding out people in power who are the wizard and other people who are on his side are trying to make it so the animals, capital A animals, in Oz no longer can speak, and they revert back to being animals, lowercase a, but also like people are just like killing them. And she doesn't stand for that, and she is wanting to help them. We see her life through the eyes of other people for the most part, and I loved the beginning of this book. I thought it was setting up so much, and the thing is that I don't think this book has a payoff barely at all. I think it is realistic in the fact that it's saying, oh, one person can't make change. But what ends up happening is we follow a woman in her 30s or 40s at this point, I don't know, who like isn't doing anything anymore. She's only ever part of a movement to stop the wizard once, and then she kind of gives up and lives in a castle away from everyone else, doing nothing but scolding naughty children. And it kind of is like, why am I here? Whatever I loved about the first part of this book has been completely overshadowed by how the second part of the book feels. And I have seen some people online talking about how part of how good the book is how sad Elphaba's life is. But I just don't think she actually does that much of a character. And because Gregory Maguire decided to not tell this from her perspective, the fact that she doesn't do anything compounds this whole idea of nothing happening. And there's a lot of loose ends in this book that never get tied up. There's some things about the ending that are very similar to the show, and there are some that are very different, but there's so many loose ends. The show tries to take some of them and tie some bows, and I actually liked those bows because I think it ties it more into being a retelling. This book is more political than the show, and Elphaba does stick to what she believes in more in this book than she does in the show, and I can appreciate that. But I just don't think that this ended up really going anywhere. It just kind of says, the world sucks, and that's it. I was expecting more of a figure who wanted to fight back against that, especially because I've seen people critiquing Elphaba in the show and the movie for not doing enough. I was expecting in this book her to do more, and I don't think she does. Also, have to say, this is an adult book. Do not give this to your children. This book talks about sex endlessly. Honestly, way too much. If you want to give a teenager a book, I think you should give them Dorothy Must Die. I really loved the first book when I was in high school. I think the sequels weren't that great, but it'll fit the bill. And I am continuing to read Les Mis. I am about 100 pages behind where I wanted to be, so I am hoping to read over 600 pages of it in December. There are some sections that I'm really struggling with. I completely understand why people would want to read the abridged version of this book, because what do you mean there's like a whole section that's just about this other battle that happened? When we are actually handling characters that I know of, even if they're scenes that I've not seen before, I feel like I have so much more of a grasp that's going on. But whenever he does an aside about things that really don't have that much impact on the book, I'm bored and I don't want to listen to it anymore. So I am mostly listening to the audiobook almost entirely at this point because I have been struggling in my physical reading and being motivated to do that, it has been easier for me to listen to audiobooks lately. So I am doing that, and that is the original English translation, whereas the book that I have is the 80s update of that translation. Where am I? The Thénardiers took Jean Valjean like hostage for like a couple minutes there, and Marius was in the room. That's like the last scene that I remember. So I'm at around like the 850 page mark out of about like 1450. Hopefully I finish it this year. If not, I'm gonna be really sad. So that's all for me today. I had a pretty underwhelming month in volume and in quality, so I am ready to get some better reading next month. So if you are still here and you don't have anything to say, why not leave me a witch emoji? I read 2 of them this month. And if you'd like to find me anywhere else on the internet, you can find me at the links in the description. Or if you'd like to see more videos from me, you can hit that subscribe button. I make videos every single weekend, and I'd absolutely love to have you around. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.